Hello, my beautiful, sexy people who are nothing but faceless icons to me on this ever expanse of the internet. So, about like a month ago, executive dysfunction go crazy. I asked for, on my Instagram, I asked people, like, oh, what are some things that you're kind of afraid to ask your queer friends? Like, questions you don't want to offend your friends with, but are genuine questions. And I should have been a little bit more realistic with myself and come to terms that probably almost all my followers are queer, so most of the people who did ask questions were asking as queer people, but you know, that's fine. I'm not mad about that. It's just a little bit funny to me. But so that's going to be more the direction this video is going to go, is just general questions people have about being queer and stuff like that. The first question I'm going to answer is, this person asked me different ways of taking testosterone because they don't like needles. And if you didn't know, the most common way and the most known way to take testosterone is a shot. And most people do take it at home, do it themselves. But this person doesn't really like needles, so they wanted to find different ways to do it. So I'm going to go through there. I found 3 different ways you can take testosterone that isn't the shot. The first 2, though, does incorporate a shot, but it's not as often as if you had to take it weekly. And I apologize if you're someone who just can't take shots for whatever reason. This is what I could find. And also, you should always, especially with medicine that's going to affect you as much as testosterone will, research on your own. I'm not a medical professional. I'm not going to pretend to be one. I am more answering these questions to kind of get people on the right track, trying to get them a foundation. And so when looking into testosterone, please do your own research. Please make sure you have a doctor who will listen to you and who knows what they're doing. But this is what I could find. So the first is you can take like pills, oral pills, and you would have to take these twice a day, and you need to take them with food. The issue is, like I said, 2 of these do require needles. You will have to, and this one does, you have to take frequent blood tests to make sure like the levels are correct. Though from my experience with needles, like getting a blood test is not as bad as a lot of other shots you have to take. But of course, if you're just no on any needles, then that, you know, isn't gonna work. The other method that will have some sort of needle involved is pellet implants, which are basically inserted into the skin near your lower area. And so basically it's inserted every 2 to 6 months, and it slowly dissolves. So if you're someone who isn't good with consistency, like taking an injection weekly or taking pills daily, this would be a lot more helpful because you don't have to consistently do it. And the only issue is there is a numbing shot that's utilized so they can do it, because they're basically cutting skin, so they want to numb you for that. So again, it's not having to take a needle weekly, it's way less frequent, but if you're someone who just can't do needles at all, this will of course be something that might be hard. And then the last one that I couldn't see would require needles, but again, if you really are someone thinking about taking testosterone, please look into it more, is topical. So like you would put a patch on, kind of like a nicotine patch, lotions, and then also gel, which I didn't know was like a thing. Like it's pretty cool that I learned about this. With this, you do have to use daily, so if you are someone who kind of struggles with that, you either might want to look for a different option, or work on trying to do better with being more consistent. And I completely understand, I sometimes have a hard time keeping routines. You have to make sure you wash your hands well after using this, because you don't want to touch things with that gel still on you, especially living things. And the issue is, especially if you are in the land of the free, home of the depressed America, most insurances don't cover this. So of course that's going to be an issue for quite a few people. Another thing is that it may cause rashes. So if you have sensitive skin, or if rashes are a big concern for you, this might not be it. I apologize that I couldn't find a ton where there was just no needles involved, but that's just what I could find. And I think for all of these, if you're going to start testosterone, they're going to have you do blood tests no matter what, because they want to make sure the levels are correct. And if you want to change how much you're taking for whatever reason, they need to know what level it was before they change it. So sadly, there is always going to be a needle involved as far as I know. That's just something to keep in mind. And so that is the first question. Okay, so the next question was, how does one figure out their gender identity? So this is different for everyone, and it's a very complicated thing to figure out. You really have to look into yourself, and that's not an easy thing to do. Here are just some pieces of advice. So like the biggest indicator of figuring out if you're genderqueer is if you get dysphoria. But dysphoria can be tricky for multiple reasons, and it's just sometimes hard to identify. And some people argue that not every genderqueer person gets dysphoria. A better way to kind of figure out if you're genderqueer is if you get gender euphoria. Okay, so just one thing I wanted to add in, after looking through the video and stuff, is in this part when I'm talking about gender, mostly I'm talking about the gender you were assigned when you were born because of your genitals. So yeah, I just wanted to clear that up. So it's a lot easier to tell when something makes you happy, and it's usually easier to identify that this specific thing is making you happy. Gender euphoria can look like if you get an odd sense of happiness when you wear clothes that don't fit your gender, or if you're referred to as a gender that isn't yours, or are perceived differently than traditionally your assigned gender at birth is treated. All of these may be you experiencing euphoria. But my biggest thing is that if you really are questioning your gender identity, research, look into different sorts of identities, look into how gender works. It's a lot, but it's important to know if you want to understand yourself better. And of course, you don't always need to have a specific label. It's just good to understand these things. And just in general, listen to yourself, listen to how you feel. So that's the advice I can give on that. Okay, so this kind of ties into the question I just answered, but someone asked, what does gender dysphoria feel like? And like I said, it can sometimes be hard to identify, especially if you're just trying to figure this all out. And other issues a person can have could be mistaken for dysphoria, or dysphoria may be mistaken for something else. So again, it's a hard thing to really identify, and it's okay if you can't, or it just feels too tough to. But some general things that could be gender dysphoria is if someone referring to you as a certain gender or being perceived as a certain gender makes you feel uncomfortable or upset in some way, this can be gender dysphoria, especially if you feel upset and it's hard to explain why that is making you feel upset. If wearing clothes that relate to the sex you were born with is distressing. Wow. So like, say you were assigned female at birth and skirts or dresses just make you uncomfortable. Every time you wear one, you don't like the way it feels, you don't like the way you look in them, and not in like I don't look good in them. It's just like a general, like, I don't like that I look feminine, or I don't like that this is a piece of clothing that is traditionally feminine, and people will see me as feminine, and I don't like that. I don't feel like a girl. Then that could also be dysphoria. And another thing is certain hair length. If you have short hair, and the idea that people will see you, as a guy, usually, and that's upsetting to you, that can also be gender dysphoria. Again, a lot of people like to argue that not everyone who is genderqueer does feel gender dysphoria. That is a heated debate that goes on. That is something some people feel, so if you feel like you get gender euphoria, but you don't get dysphoria, you may still be trans, and you are valid.
Now, it's Skibidi Toilet time!
Again, this is another question that kind of relates with the last two that I just answered. And the question is, what does having gender envy feel like? So, for the longest time, I mistaken gender envy as being attracted to people, or having a crush on a person. So, just a little tidbit from me. But basically, if you look at someone, especially if they aren't the sex you were assigned, and you want to look like them, that's gender envy. It's different than aesthetic attraction, where like you just like someone's vibes, you like their style. It's different because you actively want to look like them. You would trade bodies with them. Yeah, that's basically my take on gender envy. This next segment, I have combined a few questions because, like, each certain questions I can answer together, they kind of morph a little bit, but I will still name out which questions that were being asked and how I'm going to answer them. So, coming up in the next segments, I'm going to be looking down like this, and that is because I don't have any more contacts, and I can't wear glasses under my mask, so I'm sorry that I'm going to be staring like this, but my eyes suck. And I'm trying to look at my notes. Is, how do you cope with social disconnect as an A-spec person? And I'm also going to be answering, if you are aro, but you also consider yourself heterosexual, are you queer. So first I'm going to kind of lay the ground of the ASPEC community and how its relation to the overall queer community. So first, it's always been kind of a complicated thing, the ASPEC community and the queer community. Asexual is getting a lot more representation in media. If you go to a place that sells pride flags, the ace flag will be there. But it could still be a lot better. And also, aro is very underrepresented. If there's anyone who's aro in the media, they're usually aro ace, they're not just aro. And aro ace, there also are barely anyone who are aro ace as well. And both of those identities, you can't, if you go to a place that happens to sell pride flags, you don't see those ever. I was buying pride flag stickers and I couldn't find a aro ace sticker. It was either just ace or aro, and there were a lot of places that didn't even sell aro ones. So I just feel like that, especially aro, is way more underrepresented, and the visibility of them could be a lot better.
I think about him. Oh. In my dreams, the devil dicks me down.
In addition, there are a lot of people who think that ASPEC people aren't queer, and this is actually something that has happened to me. I've told someone my identity and they said, well, you're not actually queer. You can't be queer because of that. But that's not true, because queer is used to define people who do not follow the traditional heterosexual and cisgender lifestyle/identities. So just because as an aro ace I don't experience love doesn't mean that I'm not queer, because the queer community isn't just about who you love. I have an experience outside of the cis-het binary, so that makes me queer, and that makes anyone who's ASPEC queer, including people who are heterosexual and aro, or hetero-romantic and asexual. You have an experience outside of the normal binary, even if you do like your opposite gender. You like it in a different way that is traditional, so you are still queer and deserve space in the queer community.
Hey! Phantom tax!
With how do you deal with social disconnect? That is a very hard thing to deal with, because love is so ingrained into society that when you are outside of that, you just feel so distant from everyone else. But something that I would really recommend is learning to really have pride in your identity and think of all the good things that come with being ASPEC, especially when it pertains to you. And also, you are going to find people who are like you and have the same feelings as you, and that helps with isolation a lot. And you are going to find people who respect the way you feel, even if they don't feel the same way. It's not always going to be, you're going to be on the back burner because you don't feel the way everyone else does. There is light at the end of the tunnel. And just keep reminding yourself that how you feel is valid. And there are other people who feel that way. And just because society says that love and sex is important doesn't mean that that's necessarily correct, or that there's something wrong for you for not feeling that way. So that's my 2 bets on that.
Now I resume. Skibbity, my friend.
Okay, so next question was, how did I personally realize I was aromantic, which means you don't experience romantic attraction. Oh no, it's how did I know I was ace, sorry.
Is that guy okay?
So aro stands for aromantic, which means I don't experience romantic attraction, and then ace stands for asexual, which means I don't experience sexual attraction. So I knew I was asexual way before I realized I was aro. I knew I was ace around when I was like in middle school, and I just kind of realized I didn't care for people's bodies, the way they looked. I didn't have any strong emotions towards them, and the idea of sex just didn't seem like something I would like. And then for a very long time I thought I was biromantic and then asexual, and I did get into some romantic relationships with people, and during one of these relationships I started to realize I didn't feel that romantic connection that people talk about when you're in a relationship. I realized that I didn't mind the idea of living my whole life without a partner as long as I had close friends. The idea of marriage, living with one person for the rest of your life, just a sole person, or also, you know, if it was a polyamory thing, just living with a bunch of people in a romantic sense, it isn't what I want. I don't really want that personally, and that's kind of how I figured that out. When I realized I was ace, another thing I wanted to add to that is someone asked, how do you know you're not too young to realize you're ace? And so I had this issue for a long time. I didn't use the label ace, mostly ace, because I didn't realize I was aro until way later, but I didn't use these labels because I thought I'm too young, I don't know, I haven't been in a proper relationship yet. And in all honesty, it made things worse for me. I would go into relationships and not understand why they weren't what I thought they were. It's kind of this crashing reality check, and then you're in a situation where someone is emotionally invested in you and you realize you can never return that same emotional investment. Thinking you were one thing and then realizing that you're not that thing in the future is a very normal thing that everyone does as people, for we are not stagnant, we constantly are changing, and there's nothing wrong with realizing, oh, maybe I feel this way instead. You can choose, if you feel comfortable with ace as a label now, then you can use it. Labels are meant to help us out, and they're not set in stone. You can always change them. I changed my labels a few times before I really felt comfortable with them, the ones I have now. And that's just a very normal thing that people do. And it's just a part of, one, growing up, two, just living through life. You just learn new things, you get exposed to new things. So if you feel like you're ace right now, that's okay, and if you change, that's fine, but you might not. It's better than trying to force yourself to do something else just because you feel like you're too young to know. So that is my take on the too young part. Okay, so the last question that I got was, this person basically asked how does someone be themselves around cis people? Specifically, they were talking about cis friends and the fact that they kind of feel like they're being judged because they are genderqueer, but they don't want to conform. just the fact that, you know, cis people don't truly understand what it's like to be genderqueer, because it's not something that they've been through. The part with like they feel they're being judged, but they don't want to conform. These are your friends. They shouldn't be judging you, especially on something as intimate as a gender identity. Even if they don't perfectly understand what you're going through, they shouldn't be judging you for that. And it's something that you should talk to them about openly, like in a calm manner of like, hey, I don't want to be judged, or I feel like I am being judged. It's just a conversation you should have with them about this, especially if they're friends. Your friends should be open to listen to you. Also, with conforming, you don't have to conform to make people around you feel more comfortable, unless you're in danger if you don't conform in some way. But in general, you shouldn't have to change yourself for other people just so they feel comfortable talking to you or being around you. You should be able to be yourself, especially with friends. If you were able to, I would definitely try to find people who have similar experiences as you. Meeting people who are trans, who have similar experiences as me is very validating, and it's nice to be able to talk to people who perfectly understand. And again, I don't know this person's whole situation. I don't know their background. I've of course never met their friends, but this is just kind of general advice I would give. So yeah, so thank you for tuning into this video. I definitely need to wash this mask after this one, because there's a lot of condensation in here, so yummy. I also opened up a Patreon, so that's in my link tree, which is in the link in my bio. I am planning on doing exclusive content in that. I plan to send like little gifty things as well for people who subscribe to that. So if that's something you're interested in, you can check that out. I also have an Instagram, and I also have a Goodreads. So if you like what you're seeing here, check those out.
Sorry I missed church. I was busy practicing witchcraft and becoming a lesbian.
See you next time.